We have our last run of TED-style talk speakers, and the first of whom is Leslie-Mazwi, who serves as the chair of the Department of Neurology at the University of Washington. He's dual trained in neurologic critical care and interventional neurology and endovascular neurosurgery. Did I hit that right? Close. He co-directs the University of Washington Medicine Neuroscience Institute, a strategic clinical entity that comprises the neurological surgery and neurology departments. Beyond his clinical and institutional duties, he has appointments on various national committees, serves in an editorial role at several major cerebrovascular and specialty journals, and has multiple societal roles in key societies in the field. He's involved in clinical trial oversight for a variety of large randomized multi-center cerebrovascular trials and is deeply passionate about improving care delivery. Bay, welcome.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to take a page out of Sean's book and stay mobile and use the clicker closer to the screen. As you heard, that was a very generous introduction, but I'm really here in my American Heart Association role. I'm one of the 40,000 AHA volunteer experts, and we wanted to talk a little bit about an aspect that hasn't been touched on quite as much, which is the non-profit space. Just bring a little bit more meat to the non-profit conversation and talk about the shift in paradigm for us at the AHA from heart health to brain health. In 1920, if you had a heart attack or you had congestive heart failure, you would be confined to bed with the expectation of imminent demise. And in 1924, 6 cardiologists got together in Chicago, formed the American Heart Association, the basis then being that there was an increase in the amount of information we had about heart disease, and could we do something more organized about it? Now, if you're doing your maths, that's a century ago. Last year was 100 years of the AHA. It has changed tremendously in that time. It's one of the largest nonprofits in the world that has a $1.2 billion annual budget. And it started looking at heart disease and then evolved slightly to include the brain because of the cerebrovascular circulation, so stroke and vascular dementia. And then in the last few decades, it has focused on prevention. The most recent iteration of that is Life's Essential 8. And you see the 8 in that circle there. That highlights sleep, which is the newest edition. And then in the last decade or so, social drivers of health. And when you look at that transition, it went from disease to prevention of disease and factors that influence disease, specifically about the heart and a little bit about the brain. In that time, I said golden century on the slide there because, as you heard, I think from Jane, life expectancy has doubled in the last century. Mortality from heart disease has been slashed by more than half. And the AHA takes some credit for that, as indeed it should. So what does the second century look like? We had a big meeting visioning the next century of the AHA. And one thing that came through very clearly is that the second century is going to be a lot about the brain. One of the comments that was made was this foundational principle from futurology. And I wanted to share it with you because it really hit me hard in that session. That the comment is, the future doesn't happen to us, we happen to the future. You think about how we are going to adapt to the future when it occurs, but the future doesn't exist. The changes, the plans, the things that we do now, that's what sets the future up. And I find this an incredibly empowering thought. So if the future is about the brain, I think we all accept that it's a complicated thing. When I was in med school, we did the brain last in med school because it's the most complicated thing. You do it last in anatomy, last in physiology, etc. I was struck by the fact that the brain is the most complicated structure that we know in the entire universe. We've never encountered anything more intricate than the human brain. But the thing that really set the hook for me, and has kept it there for my entire career, I've dedicated my life to this work, is that every human experience is a brain event. We talked about gambling, every emotion you have, your personality, mental health, your physical health, the way you move, what you feel, the way your chair feels underneath you right now. That's all a brain event. So there is nothing more human, and there's nothing more important to us as a society than the brain. When I was a med student, I thought, why would I want to take care of anything else? And I still feel that today. Now, of course, brain diseases are common. We heard from the IHME, which is actually at my institution, the University of Washington, about the burden of brain diseases. There's not a single person in this room, I wager, who does not have a family that has some sort of neurological story. Mine is no exception. And they're scary. This is a poll for Americans aged 60 and older. What disease are you most afraid of getting? And what you see there is that half of people said dementia or stroke. And when I see those numbers, what it says to me is that they don't think there's anything you can do about those conditions. You remember the line from Alexander about how despair is not a natural human state, right? That's a sign of despair in my mind. They might not appreciate that 40%, maybe 45% of dementia is preventable. Stroke, for almost everyone that has a stroke, is a preventable disorder. So how do we empower people to be thinking in this way? This is something that we're thinking about a lot at the American Heart Association. We heard also from our colleague from Toronto about the diffuse definition of brain health. These are 4 different, very important, I would say, organizations in our landscape. And I just highlighted some of the words that stand out. Optimal, through every stage of life, all mental processes, and irrespective of the presence or absence of disorders. And I want to just pull on 2 of those threads a little more. This is the first, and on the subject of threads, this is a single-line illustration of your lifespan. And we've typically been here, as Jane talked about, on the aging side, when we start talking about the brain. One of the beautiful things about this whole brain health opportunity is that it pushes it all the way back to your pregnant mother. I mean, and that's really when it starts. What can you do as a pregnant mother that's good for your baby's brain? We know it's bad. Drinking a lot of alcohol, for example. What can you do that's good? What can you do as the partner of a pregnant mother that's good for your baby's brain? Questions like that suddenly start opening up. And the AHA is across this whole landscape, but I would point out that there are nonprofits that are through this space as well. And so how do we as a community engage them in this work, get them excited about this work? I have teenagers, we're talking about cell phones and social media. How does that look through a brain health lens? Gambling through a brain health lens. How do these things appear? The second thread I wanted to pull is this health and disease thread. And my whole life has been focused on disease. I mean, that makes sense, right? Medicine is about alleviating suffering. It is incredibly optimistic to be talking about health. What does optimized function look like? What does optimized memory look like? How do we optimize social interactions? How do we supercharge that? These are interesting questions, and a nonprofit like the AHA has the ability to fund work in those spaces. Think about something as simple as sleep. We have a very limited understanding of sleep. What are the mechanisms there? So I think there's going to be a whole new avenue of activities that opens up. I wanted to share a couple of frontline perspectives. So the AHA, I would say, has 3 big roles in this nonprofit space. One is as a funder. So AHA Ventures up there, Cardiation Capital is one of 3 big funds under the AHA Ventures umbrella. If you're in the startup space, this is not an American fund, this is a global fund. It's a great source to look for startup funding. The Allen Institute is based in Seattle, where I live, and the AHA and the Allen Institute have a $44 million collaboration back at the basic mechanisms. The Allen is all about basic mechanisms. So that's just a couple of examples of funding opportunities. Then there's this sort of scientific rigor, and I've just put up 3 different papers from the AHA that address the question of brain health in a structured, organized, scientific way. The third opportunity for us as a nonprofit is as a convener. There are multiple players in this opportunity. how do we bring them all together, and what does that look like? And that's something that we've been thinking about a lot as a big and influential society in America. This is my last slide. I wanted to comment that this is a tiered opportunity. At the bottom of the opportunity, but the lowest rung on the ladder, so to speak, is that we increase public engagement in health. I think that's almost certainly guaranteed to happen. We see, though, the future being a little different. We see a transformed human destiny here. Imagine a world without mental illness, without addiction. Imagine what it looks like if everyone is guaranteed that they'll age cognitively well. I bet you in 1924 they didn't think they'd double life expectancy or cut mortality from heart disease in half, but that's exactly what happened in that century. And we hope for a new human fate in the next century. So I want to just end by saying that the AHA's 3,000 staff, and I just highlight Juliana Crawford there, if you want to put your hand up, Juliana. 3,000 staff and 40,000 volunteers like me, and 40 million supporters and donors are all in on this, and we're excited to partner with you all. I'm really thrilled to be here today, so thank you.
Thank you. So I should probably mention, and I'm going to make a blanket invitation even without actually getting permission from the speakers. There's some great information on the slides that Bae just presented, as well as a lot of other speakers. And I would encourage you guys to reach out to the speakers directly to get those slides, because I think that's going to help us make the connections that we need to make. I don't know if Edith, if you want a microphone, but I'll give you one. I'm going to introduce you to our next speaker, who is Dr. Edith Skye-Gross. She's the Director of International Relations at the Paris Brain Institute, and she's trained as a medical anthropologist with a focus on neuroscience and psychiatry. She coordinates the Institute's global partnerships with research institutions and international organizations. Her work centers on advancing brain science through strategic cooperation and aligning scientific priorities with public policy at the international level. So please welcome Dr. Gross, and we will take it from there.
So hi. So everybody that comes here looks whether there are enough people. So it looks like there are enough people to be interested. So thank you for inviting me to this conference. It's a pleasure and an honor. So this is what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about how we go from here to one of our next summits that we want to climb. So we're a bunch of very talented people, but we're also very ambitious. So we're working on Canada, and we're working on the UN, and we're working on G20, but we're already thinking about the G7, which will be in France next year. So me, from the Paris Brain Institute, was asked by Harris to maybe think about how we can contribute to making this happen. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some of the thoughts that we already have, and that will also summarize a bit of the points that were already made today, so nothing super original, but we will gather some of the thoughts. So this aligns with some of the things that we already talked about, and some of the things that were already discussed here, putting the brain at the center of all our efforts. Investing in brains means investing in the future, and this is about the future. What is Paris Brain Institute, and what am I doing here? So Paris Brain Institute is located as the Pitié-Salpêtrière Hospital, which is where Charcot started his work. So this is where neurology was born, actually. We are associated with the Sorbonne University, as well as with the two biggest funders of research in France for health research, so CNRS and INSERM. We have about 1,000 experts, scientists working at the Institute. We have 12 technological platforms that the researchers can use and researchers from outside can use. We have a budget of about 100 million euros per year. We're doing great international collaborations. We're working on innovations. We have incubators, of course, and some developments around drugs. We have a program, for instance, that's called Sleeping Beauties, where we're thinking about repurposing drugs and considering molecules that haven't been used. We have training, teaching. We're very involved in society. We want to be more involved in society, but we already are doing this. And of course, we're always in dialogue with the lay audience. So, as a center of excellence, Paris Brain Institute really wants to position itself not only as a scientific organization that just does basic science or even applied science, but also to have the ways to contribute to society, and that has to go through getting involved in policy making and bringing what our researchers do to the policy making tables. So how do I conceive this exchange? First of all, looking into the component of the brain health and brain economy that Harris Eyre and his colleague have developed and that you are all involved in. So trying to understand these better and think about how scientists that are immersed in biology and questions of their molecules and could think about the broader impact of their research and how they can communicate with policymakers in society. We need to think about our involvement with the greater society through a virtuous circle, which makes science for policy and policy for science. So, science for policy, so I wasn't expecting not to be able to read my slides. Maybe you have glasses. Yeah, but then I won't. So maybe a microphone would be useful, though. Yeah.
More useful than my glasses.
I think so. So, in the area, if we're thinking about how science can influence policy and how it can enable better policy, we can think about defining brain health as an essential infrastructure. So that's the work that's been done, has been discussed today. France is already doing pretty well with some of the programs in place with infrastructure, actual infrastructure for science. But we need to think about how the brain is an infrastructure for the development of society as well. People-centered, we discussed this with everybody. We're doing it for the people and with the people. Nothing makes sense if we don't have the human at the center, right? Data and measurement, this is something that absolutely have to collaborate because it doesn't make sense to make it in silos. And that's why we need to develop global commons, such as the work that's being done by WHO, OECD, EU brain health platforms, and so forth. On the side of policy for science, so policy has to work in order to enable science to develop as well. So we're just putting it out there, 1.5% of G7 R&D budget to be brain focused and to look at innovation as well as basic research. If we're thinking about the people-centered system, so we need to embed science policy within living labs, so real reality that's being looked at and transformed. Data and measurement, we need open science, and we need to think about it with ethical guards. So open data is excellent, but always think about the ethics. And when we think about the global commons, we also have to look at the way that we're doing this with the proper guidelines. So this is pretty much stuff that we've been discussing all day, not very many novelty. But still, if we go back to the literature about why it is important to have the brain at the center of policymaking, we know that the Lancet has presented that less than 3% of brain science actually translates to health system. So we have excellent science, it just doesn't reach real humans. Science policy pipelines, this is what I'm talking about, this is the virtuous circle. We need implementation structure, we need system-based multi-domain framework. Then if we look at work from, say, Augustin Ibanez and Zimmer, we need to think about how brain and mental disorders, whether we want to think about them separately, whether we want to think about them as one whole. Seemingly, when we think about the biology, makes sense to think about them as one all-encompassing group. Integrated approach, and of course, removing the silos between, as I said, neurology and psychiatry. Again, creating a system that centers user and data, equity, cognitive outcome, and proactive system infrastructure. So again, we need to be very smart about the way that we're asking for policy making. For me, yeah, this is all also very personal. Like I said, I am a medical anthropologist, and I focused on the brain as a social construct. That means that what is the brain and what is its meaning in society? And it doesn't make a lot of sense for people who are not anthropologists. But the brain has a meaning that is cultural, but today we're learning also about the societal aspect that have to do with the brain, and also about the economical context in which we can analyze the place of brain in society. So it's all circling back. To bring us back to the G7 thinking, it is important to think about the partnering, the systemic thinking. We cannot do this alone. There's no government that can work alone and bring such change. We need to understand that we're all different, coming from different point of view, with different interests and with different positions, but we still can work together and create synergies and develop this concept. So, what's next? We need to push this idea that policy should develop science, and science should inform policy in a virtuous circle. We propose to do that through advocacy, as we're doing today, and also scientific work, to develop the arguments in order to reach the G7. We need to reach policymakers at all levels. I think G7 in Canada, leading to G7 in France next year, can mark a real change. We just need to continue working together and create these synergies. So, just to end this talk, I want to propose for you to join us. We're having a 15 years anniversary in January in Paris, where we're going to have a global forum on brain health and neuroscience. I'm sorry, it was set up before the Davos thing. So it will be right before the Davos meeting. So some of you may want to make the link between Paris and then to Davos. It makes sense. We will do it at the UNESCO headquarters because the concept was very global, and the idea is to have really multi-sectorial and decision makers around the table So we've already have the UNESCO headquarters set up. The French Academy of Science will also host us. And we've also have a part at the Paris Brain Institute. Our directors, Professor Stephanie Debet, has already engaged with the French Academy of Science, and that's the big news, I guess, and that's the part that's a bit more interesting in my presentation. We've already engaged with the French Academy of Science in order to put the brain as one of the 3 priorities for the S7 leading to 2026. So we've already made some progress, and we're getting there. We just need to work on how to integrate this into G7 as well. With your help and us working together as a continuum of what we've been working on today and in other occasions. So I wanted to thank you and apologize for the kind of dispersed talk. It's just that my notes and the slides were kind of in different geographical places, but we got it together. Thank you again. And yeah, maybe see you in Paris. I need glasses.
Yeah, well, or a mic.
Yeah.
All right, you guys, last speaker for our TED-style talks. Bringing us through the home run, I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Krystal Sexton, who is the Global Health Analytics Manager at Shell and a globally recognized leader in health and well-being, having held positions in academia and industry, with her work spanning across health disparities and inequities, and workplace mental and physical health. At Shell, Krystal now leads a global team of epidemiologists and health analysts who support cross-discipline and cross-functional work across the company, with a primary focus on mental and physical health and their impact on business performance metrics. So please put your hands together. Krystal is coming to the stage. You want a microphone?
I have about a 75% failure rate with these, so please forgive me if I am not successful in using it. Thanks, everybody. I am fully cognizant that I am standing between you, the reception, and your beverage of choice, so I will make this as succinct as possible. I am here to talk to you guys about workplace brain health measurement, where we were, where we are now, and where we're going. And I want to talk to you in a storytelling way, not in a highly technical, more boring fashion. So I want to tell some stories that we've done at Shell, and then move into what's available in the public sector, what's publicly available to you guys right now from an innovative perspective. So where were we 10 years ago? This is taken from work that we did at Shell. And it started back 15 years ago with the request to build a program around resilience. And we did that for a few years. We were measuring resilience in our employees. And we found some interesting results in the end. That the more resilient our employees were, the more engaged they were in their work, the more productive they were, and the more they felt included in their teams. And we did further analyses of that to show that the more engaged they were, the safer they also performed. And that was the first time we had made that link between anything in the mental health space and safety and productivity. Very serendipitously, we were also working on an organizational culture project for the first time about how do we show our employees that we actually care. Don't just say it, don't just give training opportunities, don't just give tangible tools. How do we actually show it? And again, we started to measure those things year after year after year, and it showed the same results. The employees who felt more cared for were more engaged in their work, they were working more safely, they were more productive, they were willing to take less money when we did an economic analysis. There were all sorts of interesting endpoints that came out of that work. And so what we did was we said, okay, we're onto something, we think. Focus on the individuals, focus on the organizational components, the results are synergistic. How can we turn this into something meaningful, not just for Shell, but for society? And so we went back, we asked our C-suite for funding, and ultimately we were granted the money to have a department that focused on holistic health. The reality is it was a brain health department, but there's a very allergic reaction by Shell executives to talk about brain health. So we labeled it as holistic health, then we went with human performance because that seemed more palatable. And then when we started talking about the educational pieces and talking to leaders about neuroscience, the way our brain works, the decisions we make, the way we act, how it impacts other employees, how it impacts the way their brains work, they were like, this neuroscience stuff's pretty cool, but don't talk to us about brain health. I was like, okay, so we worked for years to get that integrated really into the fabric of Shell. The problem we had was it was focused either on the individual or the organization, and it was lagging indicators. We weren't able to predict anything in order to prevent it from happening. So we started working on what can we do in a way that predicts outcomes, rather than the outcome happens and then we say those are associated. So I want to highlight 2 organizations before I go into some of the Shell work. The C. Everett Koop Award is one of the, arguably in the US, the most renowned of all workplace well-being awards. A few years ago, they changed their requirements, where it's no longer focused exclusively on employee health. It has to include components of organizational health and how organizational policies and processes are impacting employees and the way they think. The Carolyn C. Mattingly Award is sponsored by Johns Hopkins. If you guys are not familiar with the Love You Project and Rich Mattingly, it's quite a story. He's really an inspiration. He lost his wife to tragic murder because one of his employees had a breakdown and killed her to get back at him. And to give back to society, he quit his job and became a philanthropist, and he started this work where he gives exemplary organizations an award for mental health in the workplace. So what I'll talk about, two examples. There's 2024 award winners. One was the Franklin Cooperative, which is kind of an organization within Tennessee. They had a lot of endpoints and outcomes that were all about processes, EAP usage, EAP utilization, but they had a component that was about brain health, sleep, nutrition, the way that we think, our mental health outcomes. And that was the first time I'd seen that actually published in an award that was about mental health exclusively. Within Shell, we were acknowledged for that award last year as well, and it was the first time that we gave the predictive analyses we've been looking for. So we've measured 14 constructs. They cover some individual components of mental, physical, social health, and some components of organizational factors that impact our brain health. And what we found were there are 4 that predict adverse outcomes. Right? Your own individual resilience, the demands you have at work and whether or not you have the time to actually do that, the relationships that you have at work, and are they supportive, and your own individual view of hope and hope for the future. And those could be positive in protecting you from something like burnout, or negative in raising your risk for something like burnout. We're about to look at this with regard to healthcare costs, retention, misconduct claims amongst leaders. And maybe one day Shell will let me talk about that openly, but maybe not. I'll just come back here in the rogue and pretend that I don't work there. But the thing that's important to note, I think, here is that it was a focus and has been a focus right now on both the employees and the organizational factors, and we're looking at predicting outcomes now, not at going back. So that leads me to where we're going. And Kana, I know, presented earlier from the McKinsey Health Institute. This model was released last year, a collaboration between Georgia, the Davos Alzheimer's Collaborative, the McKinsey Health Institute, and the Business Collaborative for Brain Health through Us Against Alzheimer's. But the simplest way to describe it, on the left are basically risk factors for brain health. Brain health defined by those three components: mental health, neurological health, and workplace performance. And on the right are the outcomes that can be achieved if we focus on all of those risk factors on the left. And if you note, some of those risk factors on the left also overlap with the work that was presented in the previous slide. So now where we're going is operationalizing that kind of model. And what's on the far left is called it was just released in the event in Houston a couple weeks ago, is the Brain Health Matrix. That takes all of those levers from the left side of that model and measures them. This is work led by Ali Khan at SHAPE and his team, based on the scientific backing of flourishing in the workplace. The Brain Health Matrix will give an individual report, it gives an organizational report to leaders, and it gives scores for all of those constructs that are on the left side of that model. In the middle, on the upper component, is something called the Brain Health Index out of the University of Texas at Dallas and the Center for Brain Health. They've identified a number of constructs that also are predictive for organizational outcomes. They have an employee-focused survey and employee-focused interventions. What they found over the years is that the more often you do the brain training, the higher the index continues to get for an individual, and the more impact there is on the organization. The model in the below there is from an organization called Flow to Thrive, Linda Jarnham. Very similar, looking at individual components for the employees, organizational outcomes for the businesses themselves, putting it all together based on thriving. And then on the far right is a scorecard by the Health Enhancement Research Organization, our HERO. The scorecard's been around for 2 decades. They just released a subscale for brain health. It's about policies and practices within organizations, completed by organizational leaders, to understand how their particular policies impact the brain health of their employees. That one is still being validated. It is publicly available. All of these are available. I'm happy to chat with you. If you have questions, please do let me know. And I just want to say, just close with one plea here. A lot of people talk about their personal connection to doing this. I have a personal connection, I have a professional connection, obviously, at Shell. I'm the daughter of a drug-addicted mother who was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's. This work is very deeply personal and meaningful to me, but I work for an organization in a sector that is scared to share and is scared to talk about something that's deemed as risky. And my personal belief is we will not get anywhere if we continue to have that belief as an organization. So we've mentioned collaboration. We have to do that. We have to make a positive impact on society. Thank you.